thank you too to the Iranian American community of Texas for hosting me today. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you. Even in times as difficult as we've had these past few years, there remains so much to be grateful for in the United States. Here, we're free to associate with individuals who share our passions and our interests. Each person is free to worship God as they see fit. And we're free to debate those with whom we disagree. We're free to peacefully protest against actions taken by our government which we feel violate our rights. We cherish the dignity of every human life here and understand that it is the government that serves the people and not the other way around. So let's begin at the beginning, the revolution of 1979. Of course, the beautiful history of Persia could begin so much earlier, and to understand the civilizationally important history, the story must begin hundreds and hundreds of years before that. So one could pick other starting points. But at this moment, the revolutionary founding of the theocratic regime resides at the heart of today's Iranian conflict. There are, of course, multiple conflicts, each of them worth addressing. The conflict between the Iranian regime and Israel, the great Satan America. The conflict between the Iranian regime and the Gulf states and Sunni Arabs. And the conflict between the Iranian regime and modernity are important to understand. But one conflict is the most important to understand of all, and is to restore the rightful place for the Iranian people in history. This is the real fight, and it began in those frightful first moments of the revolution in 1979. This central fight is the one in the streets, and in the mosques, and in the minds of Iranians. It is the divide between the people and the organized opposition seeking freedom and democracy on the one side, and the entirety of the regime on the other. Look, I'm proud that I've been on the right side of this fight for over a decade now. As far back as 2010, I spoke of the Iranian people and their history, their kindness, their respect for reason, knowledge, and human life. They too are tolerant people. A homeland for Arabs and Jews and Christians and Muslims can be found on Iranian soil. Iranians want to prosper in their faith and protect their families. This is true in Tehran, as it is in Los Angeles, Austin, Nashville, or Kings Point. The regime, of course, is headed by Khamenei, Raisi, and the IRGC. It is revolutionary in its zeal. It is brutal. It is theocratic. It is craven and kleptocratic. Its leaders will kill their own by the thousands and then choose those who committed those massive atrocities to now lead their terror organization and their regime. Its leaders can shoot down a civilian airliner, killing hundreds of civilians, and think nothing of denying responsibility and hiding that black box from the rest of the world. Zarif, he wears a Western suit and speaks English with a smile. But he is a terrorist who would kill his own people to save the regime just as quickly as any of the other Ayatollah's henchmen. And now, Ebrahim Raisi. He will take on the role as the heir apparent to the faith and determined negotiator who conquers America by getting the immoral sanctions placed upon the people lifted and improving life for all. They, all of them, will keep the show going as long as they can. I'm confident the people in Iran won't let it continue, because their audience wants the show to come to an end. The regime, they're prepared to use the IRGC, the Basij, and any tool to keep their grip on power. This misunderstanding, this understanding that there are no moderates, that they are all revolutionary, recognizes and ultimately results in the fact that this regime is largely unchangeable by American policies. But we can weaken them, and we did. It's what the Trump administration's work did. Our mission was simple, and I presented it in May of 2018. At the top of this list, we demanded that the regime comply with 12 simple requirements and made clear that if the regime failed to do so, we would take every American tool and apply real pressure. This is a regime that has the power to kill its own people and to foment terror around the world, and we wanted to deny them resources to do that. The power destruction of the regime that resulted from our sanctions and our maximum pressure was real, but its application for under 2 years was insufficient to fully achieve its end goals. The regime is at its weakest point in decades, with no ability, no ability to sell more than a few 100,000 barrels of crude oil per day, no money for foreign exchange. Less than 10% of their foreign exchange reserves continue to this day. Facilities blowing up all over the place, not only inside of Iran, but across the world and at sea. And the IRGC conquering hero was erased from the map of evil that the regime had used to keep down the patriots at home and those who wanted good things for Iran abroad. We sent the rial tanking to unprecedented weakness, and we filled the administration, the Ayatollah, with a paranoia that was justified by the understanding that the revolution cannot be maintained forever and will not be. And the resistance forces inside of Iran, these noble Iranian patriots, are as strong as they have ever been and provide optimism to all who support them. And look, the people of Iran, our administration's policies supported the Iranian people at every single turn. We were there. Were labor union strikes or product boycotts, we made clear that these were the result of revolutionary incompetence, not failures of the Iranian people. And we did our best. We did our best to provide support to those who sought to be lifted out from under the yoke of the regime. You know, you can really see the effects of the last years in this past week's election. Ever more desperate, the fraud had to be increased, and the Iranian people know this, as does the Ayatollah. Since 1979, every election in Iran has served only to give an appearance of republicanism to a corrupt, brutal theocracy. The 2021 presidential election, however, is vastly different from those before it, primarily because it's taking place when the theocratic regime is at its most precarious state since 1979, and its prospects of survival are openly questioned by regime insiders and challenged by a restive, freedom-loving nation. In short, very few people actually voted for Raisi. This was a boycott. Turnout was the lowest since 1979, marking a total rejection of the regime and its candidate. It was, in fact, a boycott, and the regime knows it. They can publish whatever numbers they want, but make no mistake, turnout was insignificant, and the fact that this is a show laid bare for the entire world to see. This election is heavily impacted by a series of major social upheavals, including in 2018, and 2019. Uprisings whose main slogan was hardliners, reformers, the game is over now, death to the dictator. This shakes the very foundations of the regime in its entirety. These uprisings demonstrated the Iranian people pinned no hope on elections as a conduit for substantive change, and the election of 2021, truly the selection of Raisi as the Ayatollah's president, proved this out. The program that we'd implemented also served to lay bare the regime's economic incompetence, systemic corruption, and frankly outright plunder of the country's wealth. And they've pushed 80% of the population below the poverty line. They see the corrupt theocracy as their true enemy and the first and foremost cause of the economic crisis. One of the most dominant slogans in the recent uprisings has been, "Our enemy is right here. They lie when they say it is America." The Iranian people must know it is not America. It is the regime. As with all protest movements, flags were burned, but now the most common flag being burned was not the Israeli or the American flag, but the flag of the regime. So what's ahead? What's the path forward? Look, as I said, the regime is at its weakest point in 40 years of existence. Iranians from every corner of the nation can see the failure of the regime to deliver on the very promises that it made. Its epic incompetence in handling COVID-19 is ongoing. Vaccination in Iran is at among the lowest levels in the world, not because the vaccine isn't available, but because the regime refuses to accept vaccines from those prepared to give them precisely what the Iranian people need. The regime's epic incompetence and quest for nuclear power has made it a pariah even among its fellow Muslim countries in the region. Its incompetence is simply ruining the nation, and it's resulted in shortages of food and gas and basic staples, making them unaffordable, and the nation's ability to respond to natural disasters like floods and earthquakes virtually non-existent. In short, Iran is not working, and the Iranian people know it. As for this Raisi fellow, he's not the president of the people of Iran. He's the president of the Ayatollah. His mission is clear: inflict pain, frighten, continue to loot and to plunder. Protect the clerics, protect the Republican guards. Look, he was chosen by the Ayatollah because he's just about 60 years old and thus could lead for the next 2 to 3 decades. This will give him the time he needs to get his own people into place and demonstrate that the supreme leader wants him to have some time to prepare for the next phase of the revolution with the system in place. He'll use the IRGC and its Quds Force to generate conflict externally, to deflect attention, and to maintain the narrative of the oppressed. This is how he'll behave. But it calls for a clear response. A clear response from the United States should take the lead to hold him accountable for the crimes against humanity that he committed. Any dealings with Raisi would be tantamount to dealing with a mass murderer. This is not only immoral, but also counterproductive. We should make clear to our allies in Europe and Asia, as well to make sure that they hold him accountable, and that if they deal with this man that sent thousands of his country to execution in a massacre in 1988, that the United States will hold them accountable as well. It's worth taking just a moment to note that the apologists for the regime suggest that Raisi's election and the power now in the hands of the, quote, hardliners, end of quote, is a result of American pressure on the regime. This is nonsense. It's obvious that Iran's leadership has been static or trending right for 2 decades now. No, what Raisi demonstrates is that the IRG generation is replacing the revolutionary generation. Moreover, while Raisi and others have criticized the JCPOA, it doesn't impact them. It doesn't touch on any of their equities. Thus, they get to do the deal politically and reap the economic benefits from re-entering the JCPOA and get the resources that come from it at no cost to the revolutionary leadership. And so, Raisi is likely to complain about the deal, use that to gain even more concessions from a deal-hungry United States, but won't, in the end, block it, creating a clear pathway to a nuclear weapon. Look, the actions supporting our love of the Iranian people must begin by holding Raisi accountable for his crimes against humanity back in 1988. I know there are those in the audience who have had family that were killed in Raisi's massacre. 2, some of you have loved ones and friends currently imprisoned in Evin prison and elsewhere. And some who have had loved ones disappeared or worse. We will never forget any of them, and we'll pray for all of them. As was the case with the Trump administration, human rights and counterterrorism must be at the very center of our Iran policy. We must support the Iranian people. If we want to keep Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, we have to apply pressure until they change their behavior or until reforms which move Iran toward a democratic form of government take place. We can't shower the Ayatollah with money and economic benefits in the hopes that he won't use it to inflict terror. This thinking is foolish, dangerous, and backwards. The program of sanctions and pressure employed by the Trump administration needs to remain the model for engagement with Iran if we want to ensure the security of the American people and better lives for the Iranian people. I pray that the United States does not increase the resources he has at his disposal to empower the theocracy. Engagement with the regime will lengthen the time that the regime has to behave as it has for these past decades, denying basic human dignity and opportunity to the Iranian people. Look, I'm hopeful. The world has learned much about the theocracy in Iran these past few years. It's not that we didn't know it before, but we are afraid to confront it squarely. In Washington, D.C., there is much consensus, as evidenced by the overwhelming support for the sanctions regime that we put into place. And around the world, you can see that even in Europe, the tide of tolerance for the regime is turning against the regime. We must continue to support the Iranian people as they fight for a freer and more democratic Iran in any way that we can. There is so much good work that American civil society can do to further this goal. It is work that your organization is already engaged in. Keep up the fight. In the end, the Iranian people will have a secular, democratic, non-nuclear republic. I pray that this day will come soon, and with the support of Iranians living all around the world, and those who resist from within, that day will come sooner. I'm committed to this course. I know you all are too. May your mission be blessed and protected. May the Iranian people be blessed. It is a hopeful time and a time to redouble all of our efforts. Thank you for having me here today. God bless you, and may God bless the Iranian people.